Whenever you talk about Thomas with anyone else at a certain point in time, you clearly need to talk about who your favorite main character in the show is. In that conversation, you have the characters everyone seems to love, like Gordon, Edward, Henry, and the topic of today's video, James. James is one of the main characters of the show and one of the big three engines of the railway. He is a mixed traffic engine who is very egotistical and has a very high opinion of himself, all stemming from his coat of red paint, which makes him someone who is sometimes hard to be around or take seriously. But despite all of that, James is a hardworking engine that gets the job done, even though it is a job he most likely doesn't like doing. James is a character I have been fascinated with ever since I was a kid. He has this energy about him that I always like to see that I don't think any of the other characters with similar personalities to him never really pull off as well as James. But back then I still had engines above him like Thomas, Duncan, and Victor. Nowadays, James is one of my favorite characters on the show for many reasons, and I am not the only one who thinks that. So today, we will be going into James the Red Engine, one of my favorite characters in the franchise, with his humble beginnings in the book series all the way till the very end of the show. Let's get into his backstory and first leg of the journey. James's backstory in the books is a bit interesting. James was designed by George Hughes and built by Horwick Works at some point between 1912 and 1913. He was designed as an experimental variation of the Class 28 locomotives with a front pony truck installed at the front in an attempt to cure the nosediving the class experienced when traveling at high speeds. Though unlike many other engines at the time, the experiment did not entirely produce the results hoped for, and sometime after the grouping, James was sold to the Northwestern Railway. His first appearance in the series was the second book, Thomas the Tank Engine. Specifically in the last story, Thomas and the Breakdown Train. It was his first day on the island while taking a train. His brake box caught fire, since they were made of wood. Thomas rescued him and was sent to the works. I just recently learned this, but the wooden brake blocks thing are even inspired in real life. Audrey was told stories from railwaymen about used-built engines that were built with wooden brake blocks in them, which would sometimes catch fire if they were used going downhill. I always thought it was something made up, since I think as kids we thought engines were made of metal, so all their parts were metal, but I digress. This leads us to the third book of the series, James the Red Engine. James came back with new brake blocks and a new coat of paint. The reason he is red was that Sir Topham Hatt wanted to make James feel better and gave him a bright new color different from all the other engines on the railway that were all blue, including Henry, which is why he is the red engine that we know him today. Now let's get into what James does in his very own book. He comes back and gets the Fat Controller's hat wet. Okay. He then pulls a train and breaks one of the coach's brake pipes. Okay. He then overcomes the troubles with trucks on Gordon's Hill. That is something that I like. And then he takes over the express after Gordon makes a wrong turn. Now, if you look deeper into this story, realize that James's journey in this book is somewhat similar to Thomas. Thomas's story in the second book was him trying to show his worth to the Fat Controller. He has a couple of setbacks throughout the book, but wins him over in the end. But what made Thomas's journey in his book a lot more engaging was that he not only came first, but his redeeming himself to Sir Topham Hatt was more impressive, I would say, than pulling the express. Reading this book, you understand why Audrey would consider this his least favorite book in the series, and given that he was rushed to meet a deadline, which led to him not feeling all that inspired while making it. Now, if you were a kid and wanted to see another James-centric book come out, I got bad news for you, that doesn't happen in Wilbert's books. Throughout the rest of Wilbert's run in the Railway series, James is rarely ever a focused character. When he does get focused, it's usually when he is paired with another character, and it all pretty much plays out the same across most of the stories. James is boastful about something, or says something rude about a character in front of their face or behind their back. He embarrasses himself in the process, and then the character that he made fun of, or is the other main focus of the story, saves the day and gets all of the glory. See Toby the Tram Engine with Derby Objects, Gordon the Big Engine with Leaves, Edward the Blue Engine with Old Iron, the 8 famous engines with Double Header, and the mainline engines with Buzz Buzz. Normally, I wouldn't really pay much attention to it if it wasn't for the fact that those stories are basically all that James plays a part in terms of the books Wilbur Audrey wrote. It's a reason like this and another one that will come up later in this segment that I think James is the weakest of the main 8 engines in the books. I don't hate him, he has his moments, but compared to the other characters who are more interesting or fun to follow like Toby and Percy, or have more interesting things to do in terms of the story like Gordon and Edward, James overall just doesn't get that like the other 8 engines, I would say. The one thing about James in the books that I can say does make him somewhat important to the series is that he is integral to most of the characters' journey throughout the series. He is constantly paired up with Gordon and Henry in troublesome engines when they go on strike. He is is the one to tell the audience what the engines think of Henry and Cole. He is the engine that Toby helps in Dirty Object, which leads to him getting his new Paintwork. He is the one that Gordon helps up the hill and leaves, which leads to a series-long character arc for him. He is the one that Thomas saves in Thomas and the Breakdown Train, which ends Thomas's character journey. He is the catalyst for Duncan in Rock and Roll when he tells Duncan how to deal with diesels, and he is the one that gets embarrassed when he abandons the Express and leads to Boko taking it and having the engines see him more favorably in Buzz Buzz. While it is a little disappointing that James is written like this in Wilbur Awdry's books, I can't deny the fact that he is important to the series, just for the fact that he is the catalyst for everyone else. Now, despite the fact that James is important to almost every character in the books, he doesn't really have many dynamics with the characters in the series, except for two. The first one I will talk about, that is in two of Awdry's stories, is the dynamic between James and Toby. Now, James's character is that he is very cocky engine, who is overconfident and will do almost everything over the top, whereas Toby's character is a wide-old engine who has basically seen everything and will let engines who are in over their heads basically learn from their mistakes the hard way and laugh about it, or will join in on the fun as seen in stories like Thomas, Percy, and Nicole, and Mavis, to name a few. This pairing is a lot of fun in the two stories we have with them, where James is boasting about himself and Toby is just having a laugh about it.
You know, little Toby, he said one day, I'm an important engine now. Everybody knows it. They come in crowds to see me flash by. The heaviest train makes no difference. I'm as regular as clockwork. They all set their watches by me. Never late, always on time. That's me. Says you, replied Toby cheekily.
Now this leads us into Chris's books, where one of the first books in his run with the series was a James-focused book called James and the Diesel Engine. Now for some context surrounding this book, over the course of Wilbert's books, James was shown to have a prejudice against all diesel engines. This all started in the book Duck and the Diesel Engine, where Diesel gets the trucks to call Gordon, James, and Henry names. After Diesel was figured out to be the one to do this, James doesn't really think highly of diesels after this, while Gordon and Henry later grow to see that there are some outliers out there, like Boko and Wrong Road for Gordon, and Bear and Super Rescue for Henry. So we have James and the Diesel Engines, which intends to give a bookend to James's prejudice against diesels, but I think that overall this arc wasn't really handled all that well. Let's go into each story. The first story is about a diesel who is visiting the railway, crashing into the back of the shed, which does lead into the next story with how James badmouths diesels, but then it just leads into James having trouble with points and breaking a signal pole. Okay. Then there's Fire Engine, where Henry has trouble with his fire. This story literally adds nothing whatsoever and it's literally filler. And then the final story where James breaks down, pulling a train, and then a random no-name diesel pushes him to the works. Do you see the problem here? Do you see it here, at all? The actual journey for James's prejudice against diesels is basically non-existent in this book. The first story was a good setup to the journey, and it did get mentioned in the next story, but then after that, it's just James getting into trouble with no mention of diesels until the last story with a no-name diesel, which should have honestly went to Bear, since he is a character and rarely got any attention in the books after Enterprising Engines. It's for this reason that I believe James and the Diesel Engine to be one of the worst books in the Railway series. Not the worst, but still pretty bad. After this book, James doesn't really do anything else of note in the series and goes back to being a character that rarely does anything of note and becomes a catalyst for other characters. The last thing I need to mention about James and Chris's books is the dynamic between James and Henry. James and Henry are both obsessed with self-image, with Henry's coming from a place of self-conscious, while James comes from being vain. There are many stories in Chris's books where one tramples the other, like Henry getting the last laugh in Crossed Lines, James getting the last laugh in the next story Fire Engine, and when James and Henry pull the Express together in Overhaul. While I wouldn't say that these stories are amazing, the moments of James and Henry being rivals are some of my favorite moments in Chris's books. Overall, James in the books is a character who didn't really do much as a character. He was more so a catalyst for most of the characters than really a character with much to do. And when he did get something to do, it was generally something that someone had already done or was generally half-baked. While I wouldn't say that I hate James in the Railway series, it is somewhat clear that the other engines were given more focus, like Gordon, Thomas, and the Skarloey engines, which is why I would say he is the weakest character in the Railway series. Let's move on to the TV series. James, like many of the main characters in the show, was introduced in the first season of the show. His first appearance was actually the first episode of the show, Thomas and Gordon, which is a little weird since James didn't show up in the first 2 books of the Railway series. Maybe he was meant to be a placeholder for a nameless engine just doing what he's doing, but his first appearance as in an actual name drop was in Thomas and the Breakdown Train, where it plays out the same as the Railway series. On his first day on the island, his brake blocks catch fire and he derails on a cow field. Now this is a classic story for the series, but I feel like it would be more effective if James wasn't in the earlier episodes of the show, though he wasn't really name dropped in these episodes like I said, so that's something I guess. Maybe there was just a clone army of James before he came to Sodor. Actually, knowing what would come with that in later seasons, that would be a nightmare. After that episode, for the next 2 seasons, James would do all the things that happened in the Railway series. He would go through his first character arc, would prove himself to Sir Tom and Pat, he would go on strike with the big engines after Thomas left the yard, and would be the catalyst for characters like Edward, Percy, and Duck in season 2. He felt more like a side character than anything in those first 2 seasons of the show, not too dissimilar to how he felt in the Railway series. But then we reach season 3, where we get something new to James that hasn't been done in the Railway series. James becomes proud of his red paintwork.
He's proud of his smart red paint, and so is his driver. "Hello, Trevor," said James. "You look as bright and cheerful as my red paint."
This is something that James would keep for the rest of the show and is basically synonymous with his character and is the reason why James becomes Vade and needs to inflate his own ego. They also started to pair him up with characters he didn't really talk to in the books like Thomas and Percy, and I want to highlight James and Percy first. When James and Percy are teamed up, it is such a fun time. Percy in the early years of the show was someone who was cheeky and vengeful. Whenever he felt that he was talked down to or mistreated, he would give you hell. See Ghost Train, Duck Takes Charge, or Percy and Harold, which you pair with James, someone who needs to tell anyone around him that he is better than everyone else. So seeing James and Percy trying to one-up each other is pretty fun.
Got yourself in a bit of a jam, eh, James? A sticky situation? Be quiet. It's not funny having jammed brakes. And not very reliable either. I'm surprised you let it happen, James. Nothing should stop us engines.
It also helps that in most of these episodes, no one really was, with the standout example being their first episode as the main pair, Percy, James, and the Fruitful Day. Though season 6 played more with them with the episodes Jack Frost and Middle Legend. The dynamic is the only reason Middle Legend is not the worst classic era Thomas episode. I'm being serious. One thing that the classic series really did well is the writing between James and Gordon. James is someone who is vain and needs an ego boost all the time. Meanwhile, Gordon is very pompous and is the premier express engine, the engine that everyone knows and sees when he goes down the main line. So because of this, James sees Gordon as his equal, while Gordon doesn't see it that way and sees James as beneath him. This dynamic is pretty fun and can lead to some moments in the show that I think are pretty interesting things to see. The first one is no joke for James. James being his typical self, where he sees himself as higher than most of the other engines, which leads to him putting himself between a rock and a hard place, when he tells Gordon that he has big plans for James.
But Sir Topham Hatt has plans for me. James was only making this up, but Gordon believed him. What plans? Wait and see.
Which leads him to trouble when he tricks Thomas that he is meant to take the express. No Joke for James is an underrated episode, one of my favorites of the season. The other example is one of the later classic episodes, James and the Queen of Sodor. In the episode, James gets a spotlight job and won't shut up about it, which leads to Gordon tricking James into thinking that he has taken the Queen of Sodor, when in actuality, he is taking a rundown boat.
"I'm here to collect the Queen of Sodor," announced James. "There she is," the odd manager said. James was furious. "That slimy old tub? Gordon tricked me. He wants me to get dirty. I'll show him."
This dynamic always leads to James losing and Gordon having the last laugh no matter what. It is such a fun pairing. After season 3, James didn't really get much episodes to work with. He got 2 main roles in season 5 with The Trouble with Trees with Thomas, a dynamic I will talk about later in this section, and Making Someone Happy. 3 season 6 episodes with The Bread Balloon, which is just a fun time, 2 episodes with Percy with Middle Legend and Jack Frost, and a fun episode pairing him with Gordon in season 7 with The Queen of Sodor that I already mentioned. This then leads us into the hit era. The hit era of the show had changed so much of the show, and we could see that with the Writer's Bible we got in 2024. With this Bible, we got descriptions written about the main characters, and the Bible for James reads as thus. James is fabulously narcissistic. He's an all-purpose agent, which means he works both the main and branch lines, pulling trucks and occasionally smaller coaches. He's the same size as Edward, with a coal tender at the rear, which means he can't shunt. In the playground, James comes somewhere between Thomas and Henry and Gordon. He's not vulnerable the way Percy is, but his undisguised vanity makes him open to teasing. He lacks the status to be truly pompous, because he's selfish and narcissistic. The temptation is to cast James in the baddie role, but he isn't bad, he just thinks he's special. Why else would he be the only red agent on the island? He often says something provocative that can help to emphasize the failing part of a story, maybe criticizing Percy's appearance, which is then later resolved by an apology or gentle reprimand. He's the closest thing Thomas and Friends has to a rebel, capable of refusing to do things and showing off for the sake of it. James is never dull and brings color and attitude wherever he goes. Now, as an overall description of James as a character, I think it does a good enough job describing him, but it does suffer from that kiddified writing with stuff like in the playground. Now, normally we expect the characters and major changes like this to change quite a bit when heading into a new format. Percy, for example, went from a character who would stand up for himself whenever he was put down upon to someone who needs to have everything explained to it like he is the dumb one of the group.
What's a dimmer station? Demonstration, said Thomas. It's when you show off what you can do.
The railway inspector arrives today, Sir Topham Hatt said.
What's a railway in spectacles? Percy asked.
Railway inspector, Gordon huffed.
He comes to look at the railway every year, said Thomas. He checks everything is spick and span.
James, on the other hand, is one of the few characters who I would say didn't become out of character throughout this run of the show. Almost all of his appearances were all in character, with examples going to James gets a new coat and dirty work coming to mind. Especially James gets a new coat, with the Percy and James dynamic being in full force here.
I like your new coat of paint, he puffed cheekily. You do look splendid.
James knew he should have listened.
Something the hit era really excelled in was the Thomas and James rivalry. They played a bit of James with Thomas in season 5 with episodes like Make Someone Happy and The Trouble with Trees. The reason that I think it works is that when Thomas is in character, he is a hothead, cheeky person who isn't all that bright. Pair him up with James, who has a similar enough personality, and you get some fun episodes. Episodes surrounding Thomas and James are some of the most fun in this era of the show. We got stuff like Thomas and the fireworks display, Thomas's new trucks, even some episodes post season 9 like Follow That Flower. What makes this dynamic work in the hit era more than in the classic era is that they really push the hot-headed or self-important nature of these characters in these episodes, which basically makes everything a competition for them, and it is hilarious.
Hello, busted boiler, teased Thomas. You don't look very useful now. James was upset.
Why, James? I'm the one who needs a new coat. Look at me. I'd rather not, retorted James. You're not a pleasant sight, and wouldn't understand the needs of a really important engine.
There was even a rivalry episode that was a focus on Thomas, but instead with Duncan. Duncan's Bluff is one of, if not my favorite episode of the entire hit era. This episode is the competition between Duncan, a character who is plain speaking and speaks as he finds it, and James, a character who needs his own ego to be stroked. Playing these two characters together is just a recipe for some of the funniest moments of the show.
You were a long time getting here, teased Duncan. You're lucky I came at all, wheezed James crossly. I've got an important job to do later. I'm taking some children to a concert. Oh, is doing 2 jobs in one day too hard for you? Duncan chuffed cheekily. Ha, snorted James.
One thing I also really liked that this era did was James with his relationship with Edward. Back in the classic era of the show, James barely had respect for Edward. There was some respect shown towards him in episodes like Old Iron and Edward's Exploit, but other than that, James doesn't see Edward all that highly. It was even shown in the episode Keep 'Em Up with James when James doesn't look highly on Edward for being slow when clearing the track of snow and delivering coal cars. It all comes to an end in the season 10 episode, James' Second Best. In this episode, James is not chosen to be on a poster, but instead Edward is chosen over him. The edges all agree that Edward deserves to be on the poster since he is just the best, which makes James feel inferior to Edward. So to prove that he could be as good as Edward, he tries to do all of Edward's jobs better than Edward, which all seems to fail. It all leads to the climax of the episode where James is in front of Edward before he arrives at the station, which of course leads to disaster. The episode ends with James helping Edward out after he was the one that caused Edward to be damaged. This episode really shows a side of James that we never really see in the show. A side that is more vulnerable and fears inferior. Maybe that is why he needs his own ego stroke so much, because he feels inferior to the likes of Edward and Gordon. Just something to think about that I find pretty interesting. One more thing I want to mention is the episode James Works It Out. This is really a great episode, but one thing I really like about it is the James and Hector character dynamic. Back in season 11, we got the episode Hector the Horror. Now we don't need to talk about the entire episode, but one thing that needs to be pointed out is that James sees Hector as just a truck.
He does look troublesome, Huff James.
Which makes sense. The general consensus of the trucks on Sorter is that most, if not all of them, are troublesome and are the likely cause of accidents on the island. It also makes sense for James given his history of trucks, and this episode seems to be the end point of this arc. In this episode, James shows off that he can shunt Hector, inflating his ego.
Oh, that was nothing. See how easily I can shunt heavy Hector.
And throughout the episode, James is not listening to Hector whatsoever, which makes sense since Hector is a truck in his eyes. But when James is in a sticky situation with his train, he's willing to let Hector help him out. And when Hector's plan works, James's view on Hector changes for the better, realizing that he's one of the better trucks on the island.
You can always rely on a good freight car. Hector was happy to have helped.
Not the best episode of the era, but an episode I quite enjoy, and I am so glad it is getting more recognition. James in the model run of the show was one of, if not the most consistent character in the show. Never really had a downfall or a moment where he was out of character, unlike some of the other characters of the show like Thomas, Edward, or Percy. It seemed like the writers knew who James was and kept it that way. They really did more to him than in the books, where he just sort of faded into the background after the first few books. In the model era, they gave James a distinct character trait that he kept throughout the show, and he is synonymous with him. And they did more of him in terms of the character dynamics with characters like Thomas, Edward, Gordon, and Percy. Even in the later years of the model era, James was still consistent, and they did interesting things with him that they didn't do in the earlier years of the show. If that doesn't speak on how well this character was handled, I don't know what will. The model era was James's coming out party, and he came out swinging. So, how did the CGI era handle this lovable jackass of a character? James made his CGI debut in the first production of CGI Thomas, Hero of the Rails. Just like the rest of the characters in that movie, he helped Thomas restore Hero to working condition. He didn't really speak much in the movie like the rest of the characters that were Thomas, Percy, Hero, or Spencer. James was portrayed by Carrie Shale in the US from season 13 to season 18, before the recast that happened with The Adventure Begins. I honestly think that Carrie Shale was the perfect voice for James. He has this snooty voice that really fits James's personality a lot.
Brake vans. I don't know why I need a brake van at all. I never have accidents.
In the UK, from Hero of the Rails to the end of the Brenner era, he was portrayed by Keith Wickham. Keith Wickham's James is about on par with Carrie Shale's James in terms of nailing a voice that fits the personality, but I would be lying if I said I preferred Carrie Shale's voice for the character. But Keith Wickham still did a great job with the character.
Ta-da! Here's James! I'm ready for my coaches!
Finally, there is the final actor for James, Rob Rackstraw, who would make his debut with The Adventure Begins in the US and then the Big World era in the UK. He is a fine actor for James. My main thing with him is that he sounds a little too high toned for my liking compared to Carrie Shale and Keith Wickham, but he has his moments.
Oh, ta-da! You can take my cars away now, Thomas. I'm ready for my coaches.
James' first real debut in CGI and a starring role was the season 13 episode Tickled Pink. In this episode, James is sent to go get a new coat of paint, but has to leave early and is left with his pink undercoat on. Part of me wants to believe that this episode was inspired by Henry C's Red from the Railway series, but this is the nitrogen era of the show, so it's highly unlikely. While it's an episode to be remembered, I do think it is one of the better episodes of the nitrogen era. It's a nice change to see James in a state of insecurity, something that we rarely see in the show. Aside from that, James was not used much in the nitrogen era of the show. He got an episode where he doesn't want a headlamp, an episode where he tries to do a rescue engine but gets one of the dumbest crashes in the show's history.
James roared and raced down the track. He hit Gordon's buffer with a biff and a bash and a terrible smash. Gordon the Grand had toppled off the track into the muddy fen.
We got an episode where he tried to be clean for a certain event. I wonder where I saw that before. but the fact he never got much in the engine era is baffling to me, since he is one of the big three alongside Thomas and Percy, so to see other characters like Henry and Toby get more episodes than James just gives me the vibes that they didn't really know what to do with him like Emily and Edward. Then everything changed when Andrew Brenner came in. Andrew Brenner has said before that James is one of his favorite characters, and I think that it was clearly shown by how James was pushed more than ever in the show. He got a role in King of the Railway, helping Thomas and Percy rebuild the castle. He got more than one major episode in season 17. The first one is The Phantom Express, where James, being the piece of shit that he is, scares Percy and Stephen, but later gets the bejesus scared out of him, and the other episode is The Smelly Kipper, where James takes the flying kipper. Now, these aren't groundbreaking episodes, since it was obvious that this season was the writers getting a feel for the characters, but I do like how The Phantom Express brought back the James and Percy dynamic, even if it was one of the weaker ones. This then leads us to Tales of the Brave. James is the antagonist of the film. He is the one who antagonizes Percy about being scared of monsters, and later in the movie to show how scared he is, which later bites him in the ass.
Hello?
Not again.
This is typical James fun, but I like how gradual his arc is. He starts to show some remorse for what he did in the climax of the film, and then it comes full circle when Percy saves James from the landslide, and it is then that he fully apologizes for what he did and becomes friends again with Percy. Masterpiece writing right there. Man, I can't wait to see James in season 8. God fucking damn it. I don't know if this is a hot take, but I do not like James in season 18. The episodes he appears in makes him even more unlikable than ever. He gets 3 episodes, 2 of them where he is paired up with Duck, and 1 where he is paired up with Toad, the brake van. He is just such a jerk to everyone around him and never really learns anything, especially towards Duck, when his episodes with him are back to back. At least with Toad, he never bothers him again, and in fact helps him at the end of the episode, which I like.
You'll never believe what happened to me today. Let me tell you all about it.
Actually, Oliver, I think you should ask Toad about the adventure he had today.
But still, I wish it wasn't all that James had in this season. Now, this isn't the worst thing season 18 did. I'd rather take James in this season than Emily Saves the World or Samson. God, I hate Samson. But I think that James had and will have better offerings later on. There is something that needs to be said about James in season 18, which is the dynamic with him and Duck. Now, this is a pairing I think works well for rivalry stories or stories similar to episodes like Dirty Object and Doubleheader. James doesn't really listen to reason, since he is very vain and narcissistic character, whereas Duck is one that cares about order and doing things the right way, which makes them conflict in personality. While I don't love the episodes they are both in as the leads, I do like the moments they have together in them.
It's a shame you've been stuck with a goods train, Duck, but I suppose somebody has to pull cars.
Oh, I thought you sometimes pulled cars too.
That may be, but splendid-looking engines, such as myself, should always pull passengers.
Following season 18, we got The Adventure Begins, which takes place at the beginning of the CGI timeline. In this movie, James is on the island before Thomas, which is very much different from the Railway series and the Model series. He does keep his black paintwork from beginning to end, which is something that was in the books, which I quite like. But other than that, he doesn't really have a lot going on. I do like how the little actions he does shows how he looks up to Gordon and how he is somewhat embarrassed on this wooden brake box and tries to hide it.
Do you smell something smoky, James? Like a burning smell?
No, not really. Nothing out of the ordinary.
But that's really about it. The next major James episodes were in season 20, where we got 2 episodes that acted like a little arc for him. The first episode that centers around this arc is Pouty James, where after James acts like the typical character he is, he gets his coaches taken away, which leads him being made fun of from the other engines, with how he acts pouty afterwards. It's not until Thomas and Emily tell James that he should look on the bright side of things and take a joke every once in a while to keep his spirit up.
Come on, James! Put a smile on that face!
This then naturally leads into the second part of the mini arc, All in Vain. In this episode, James is tasked with an important job, but must do all of his jobs before then. While working, his paint gets dirty, but he sticks with his jobs, until he learns he has a scratch, which becomes his biggest downfall. He is his own worst enemy. I think this is one of the best James stories in the series. You see that James definitely learned from Pouty James and is really trying to see the bright side of things, but you feel so bad for him since he really wanted to do the special job he was given. He's definitely sympathetic. Even though it's not the standout arc of the season like Glenn's two-parter or an interesting concept for his character like Cautious Connor, I do really like this little arc for James, and it definitely made my revisit of season 20 a lot more eye-opening for him. One thing that ruins this arc for me is the fact that James is the same character after the events of season 20, where he acts like the characters he was in the previous seasons, which just makes the arc he had feel underplayed or a one-time fluke. I don't think it helps that James in this era is the same character, but too much. But I do know why they did this, as it would make James a somewhat boring character to follow. But part of me wishes that he kept some of those qualities from that arc. James's end of the Brit era was in the movie Journey Beyond Sodor, in the season 21 episode The Fastest Red Engine on Sodor. I think that James is the best part of the Journey Beyond Sodor movie, because he gets one of the best songs in the movie with Someone Has to Be the Favorite, but he is also the only character in the movie that actually has a functioning brain cell in the entire movie, which leads to some of the funniest parts of the movie when he breaks the fourth wall at the steelworks.
All right. This is all very entertaining, but where's Thomas?
Then in The Fastest Red Engine on Sodor, James is the same James as we know, but he does crash into Tim's sheds, which leads to the events of A Shed for Edward, which then leads into new characters for Big World coming to Tim's sheds. So basically, James caused the Big World era of the show to happen. After the Brent era, we got into the final era of the show, the Big World Big Adventures era. James in this era of the show really didn't get much, so this section won't be as long. We got 3 episodes that are worth mentioning in this era. The first one is the episode Engine of Many Colors. This episode takes place after the events of The Fastest Red Engine on Sodor, where James dreams of what color he might be, since he has fallen in love with Sir Topham Hatt, which was a callback I was not expecting from the show this late into it. But other than that, it was a pretty good episode, which is no shock since Michael White wrote this episode. The second episode is Apology Impossible, which is a Philip and James episode, and it is pretty atrocious. James in this episode is just an asshole and doesn't really learn from his actions. It just makes him more unlikable. Probably the worst James episode in the show. Even though we have James to the rescue in Dirty Work and the third episode where he imagines himself to be a superhero, this was the last James appearance in the show, and I have literally nothing to say about it. James in the CGI era was still pretty good. It had some high points. I love his role in Tale of the Brave and Journey Beyond Sodor, and I especially love his little arc in season 20, showing us that he had potential to be better. But what keeps James back in this era is that he was more annoying than ever. He was still in character, but was always taken to the most extreme way possible, which compared to other characters in this era, he did get off a lot better than others. And that is about everything you need to know about James in the series. James is a character who didn't really get much in terms of development or in terms of a story arc, but honestly, I find that to be pretty charming. James is a character who knows who he is, and he wears it proudly. He's not like Gordon, who learned sense, not Edward, who showed that he was indispensable to the railway, and he is not Thomas, who matured throughout the years. James is the same character throughout his life on the island of Sodor. He was consistent from beginning to end, and I think that is why he is a lot of people's favorite character. If I were to pick the one era I liked the most, it would be the model run of the show. They did so much with the character that wasn't really there in the books or even parts of the CGI run. So many character dynamics that got their start, like with Thomas, Percy, and Duncan, his love for his red paint that stayed till the end of the show, and episodes that explored him in interesting ways. It's all something that makes James a fun character to follow, especially when he is with someone else. I don't hate the other eras of James whatsoever, but they are definitely lacking compared to the model series. Tell me, what is your favorite episode or James appearance in the show or books in the comments below? And that was James the Red Engine, one of my favorite characters from the show, who is vain like his paintwork.